The moment you start studying the First World War through the lens of food production, you quickly realize something. The home front was the second battlefield. Supply shortages, blockades, rationing, and the collapse of trade forced ordinary people to become extraordinary growers. That's why, before we get into the 10 unbelievable WW1 survival farming tricks you can still use right now, let me lay down the hook that would carry this as a 1-minute opener. If you were suddenly cut off from modern fertilizers, imported seeds, and constant food supply, these century-old techniques could still keep a household fed. They were developed under extreme pressure, they were tested in the harshest conditions, and they absolutely worked. What makes them so powerful today is that they require no modern machinery, no expensive chemicals, and no complicated training. They're the kind of tricks that prove that resilience is not a modern invention. It was carved out of necessity by people who didn't have a choice, but still managed to feed entire communities. And when you dig into these methods, you start seeing how practical and shockingly relevant they still are for anyone who wants real self-reliance. So let's get straight into the heart of it. One of the most important WW1 survival farming tricks was maximizing yield on tiny plots of land, because many families lost access to farmland when men were drafted or fields were requisitioned. In Britain and France, backyard allotments became essential. The key lesson here was intensive spacing and layered planting. Instead of long, wide fields, families planted in tight rows, filled gaps with fast-growing crops, and never allowed bare soil to sit unused. You can use this right now by planting carrots between onions, radishes between cabbages, and leafy greens under taller crops. The method works because you're harvesting at different times, so nothing interferes. It turns a small garden into a surprisingly productive micro-farm. Another lesson from WW1 farming was the use of compost trenches as a substitute for factory fertilizer, because industrial nitrogen was redirected toward ammunition. Farmers solved this by digging trench beds, filling them with kitchen scraps, garden waste and manure, then covering them with soil to plant on top. As the buried material decomposed, it fed the crops from below. A modern gardener can replicate this by digging a long, narrow trench, tossing in everything biodegradable, dumping soil over it, and planting heavy feeders like squash, tomatoes, or beans right above. It's a low-effort system that produces high yields without buying fertilizer. A third trick that kept families fed was the strategic use of wartime staple crops, because these crops had to be reliable, calorie-dense, and low maintenance. Potatoes, turnips, beets, and barley were the backbone of many villages. They stored well, grew in poor soil, and survived inconsistent weather. If you want long-term food security, incorporating similar staples makes your homestead more resilient. Try dedicating at least one part of your garden to crops you can store through the year. A simple example is growing a bed of potatoes, curing them, and storing them in a cool, dark place. It stabilizes your food supply in a way modern fast-spoiling produce cannot. The Fourth World War I technique worth adopting today was ration-driven crop rotation. Because, the war really forced growers to think more carefully about soil exhaustion. This wasn't just some academic idea. Overused soil meant, hunger. So farmers rotated legumes, root crops and grains in predictable cycles. If you follow a similar pattern and alternate nitrogen-fixing beans with heavy feeders like corn or brassicas, your soil stays fertile without synthetic fertilizers. A home gardener can set up a simple 3-bed rotation and cycle crops each year to keep balance in the soil. Another powerful survival trick from the war was community seed sharing, because honestly, imported seed stocks were just cut off. Gardens thrived only when people pooled what they had. This created regional strains uniquely adapted to local conditions. Today, you can mimic this by collecting seeds from your healthiest plants and trading with neighbours or local growers. Over time, you end up with seeds that handle your climate better than anything bought in a packet. A 6th World War I insight was the practice of growing fodder crops to support small livestock, because animals like rabbits, goats and poultry were essential protein sources for families. They survived on locally grown feed, such as clover, mangels and forage beets. If you keep small livestock, you can follow this approach by growing patches of fodder crops rather than relying solely on store feed. Even a small area dedicated to clover and greens can cut your dependency on purchased feed. A 7th technique was in-ground food storage, which kept families fed during winter shortages because, cold storage rooms were really a luxury. Farmers dug clamps, these shallow pits lined with straw where root vegetables were stored directly in the soil. This method, it still works. Just dig a shallow trench, lay down some straw, pile your turnips or beets, cover it all with more straw and soil, and honestly, they'll stay fresh for months. It's a perfect off-grid storage method. Another vital trick was turning every available surface into a growing space, because, farmland was strictly rationed. People grew beans up walls, herbs in windowsills, and even potatoes in sacks. The modern equivalent is vertical gardening. You can grow pole beans on fencing, tomatoes on trellises, or, even potatoes in stacked containers. It really expands your production without expanding your land. A 9th survival tactic was wartime water discipline, since irrigation water was often restricted or, honestly, diverted toward military needs. Gardeners used rain barrels, clay pot irrigation and heavy mulching to keep moisture trapped. You can apply the same techniques today by covering your soil with straw or leaves, placing ollas near thirsty plants and collecting rainwater from your roof. These methods, they drastically cut water usage. The 10th and final World War I farming trick that still applies today was crop redundancy, because, one failed harvest could mean a hungry winter. Families planted multiple varieties of the same crop to increase the odds that at least one strain would survive pests or weather. Try growing 3 types of beans instead of just one, or mixing early, mid and late potatoes. You don't need more space, just smarter selection. If you want more historical survival guides like this, make sure you subscribe to Echoes of Survival, share this video, and help bring more history enthusiasts into this community of serious learners.